Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a really difficult game to play, and not necessarily for the reasons you might expect. So, welcome back to Team APS Plus. Paul here. Today, I'm back to my complaining and whining, but not really. This is more of just a free-form kind of stream of consciousness video about why I think Yu-Gi-Oh! Can be really demanding to play. I actually don't think that Yu-Gi-Oh! Is hard to learn, and that's an important distinction. So, people will oftentimes say like Yu-Gi-Oh's so complicated and the rules are impossible to learn. There's so much to learn. I don't actually think so. I think that most of Yu-Gi-Oh's systems, especially the ones that have been in place since the beginning, are pretty rock solid actually. It's easy to understand what attack and defense strength does and how that works. It's easy to understand monsters' levels, attributes, and types. It's easy to know kind of how spells and traps work and how the different ones function and stuff like that. And even like learning all the different summoning types, while it can be a lot to learn, they mostly make a lot of sense and they're pretty intuitive. So once you know them, you know them. I think that Yu Gi Oh's difficulty actually comes in more around just how much mental data and information you have to juggle at one time at any point in the game, in and out of the game. And I'll get into that in a second. So, with Yu Gi Oh, like while you're playing, knowing the rules, not that bad. Knowing what's been happening that turn can be though. So you know that we oftentimes will get, long chains that happen, especially with like the Shizu tier deck that's going on right now. Like, you know, in mirror matches of that, like chains can get up to like chain link 10 very easily. But even just normally, you can go to like chain link 3, 4, or 5. Like, it's quite a common thing to see. And so chains will have a lot of links to them. Like I said, I don't think that the concept of chains is like a tough thing to understand. Effects are stacking, you resolve them backwards. I've done it for years. That's just Yu Gi Oh! It's more so keeping up with like, okay, there are a lot of hard once per turn monsters. Which ones have activated? Which ones haven't? Like what are the conditions that are currently on the field? Has, Droll and Lockbird been played? Is somebody under Pot of Prosperity where they can't, do this? Like they only deal half damage this turn, or like Pot of Extravagance or whatever. Like you can't draw cards with card effects this turn. Things like that. How many cards have been banished face down? You know, just what's going to be resolving in this end phase. Like what do you need to remember for this end phase, right? And so I think that I have a lot of respect for the players who are able to easily do it. And I also think that, I'll see like, in our videos, for instance, right? We pretty much make a misplay in every damn video we make. That's not really a secret at this point. It's actually kind of a running joke around the office that we will mess something up in every video and people will be upset about it. So I'm not here to say like, oh my god, you're so mean, you're hurting my feelings. It's more like I read these comments where people are like, oh, you should have done this, you should have done this, or like this actually resolves this way. And like it's fine to point it out, like I get it, but I also feel like when I think of how I feel when recording Yu-Gi-Oh duels, sometimes I'm like, there's just so much mental data to kind of keep in your head while also like, keeping up a character and recording the videos and things like that. Because that's like a thing that we try to do. And then also like sometimes you'll have to read cards and learn them sort of on the fly. And that gets into my second point about like there's a lot going on in game, there's a lot going on out of game to keep up with in Yu-Gi-Oh. So in Yu-Gi-Oh, there's lots of archetypes, and different archetypes will have their own different like sets of gimmicks and just ways that they work. And there's sort of the cards that you know about, and there's like the more obscure cards in a given archetype, and it can really add up. So let's say that you're playing against any deck for the first time, but like let's assume that you're playing against Tearlaments for the first time, right? If you play against tier a lot, then it's maybe not that bad. But like, if you have to kind of learn the whole when they go to the graveyard by a card effect, they're able to fusion summon using cards from the hand or the field or the grave, and the cards go to the bottom of the deck. That alone means that there's a lot that can happen in a turn with a Tearlaments card, and that the Tearlaments player can probably keep up with it fine themselves, but then you as the opponent also, the onus is on you to like be keeping up with it too. So you have to keep up with like which ones have activated that turn, and what got sent by what effect. Did this get sent by an effect or did it not get sent by an effect? What's in the hand? What's in the grave? What's banished? What are the options open? Because now like if you're preparing for tier, you need to know like what are the possible fusion monsters that they might be making here. Um, and so all these factors are sort of like weighing on your mind that it can be really easy then to miss a small effect because Yu-Gi-Oh monsters have multiple effects oftentimes and the effect text is really long. I'm not really going to be trying to complain so much about how long the effect text is, but rather just the fact that there's oftentimes like effects that have small nuances to what they can or can't do or some little tiny stipulation. Like what I said earlier with like Pot of Prosperity, right? You deal half damage for the rest of the turn. But sometimes in Yu-Gi-Oh, a turn can go so long and so much can happen that, like imagine, let's say, playing Pot of Prosperity, right? And, picking the 6 cards that you want to banish, and then, milling the cards out on the mat, kind of deciding which one you want to get. You grab it, and then the stipulation of like half damage happens for the rest of the turn. Then you summon a monster, use its effect, and now let's say your opponent uses like a hand trap, or better yet, a Tearlament's Havness, right? We always talk about that one. And then so that gets summoned, it mills cards, it mills like an Agito, and then the Agito is gonna like activate a new chain, it's gonna mill more cards, and then like all these cards that got milled have all these effects that are gonna have to resolve. So like, some of them might be milling more cards, some of them might be doing a fusion summon, some of them might be doing a search, and then maybe a Bestial monster gets summoned in the process. And it's not summoned yet. First, it's just activating in the hand and it's targeting a card, and you're kind of deciding what you want to do about that and what that means. If you need that card, should you negate it? Should you interact with it? And then the Bestial gets summoned. And let's say it's like Magna Boot, and so it has to activate its effect. So it's going to be searching in the end phase. And so now like there's just this stack of things and factors that are like affecting the game right now that you have to keep in mind. And then you continue on about your turn, and you finally get to the battle phase, and it's like Pot of Prosperity felt so long ago, right? That it resolved. And so now you do the battle phase and you deal damage like normal instead of dealing half damage. And it's interesting because, if that's like shown on a screen, like if that's like a YouTube video, then everybody in the comments who's like kind of like just watching at the edge of their seat, paying attention to every detail, it's easy to keep up with from the sidelines, but maybe you forgot. And then now people are sort of like angry. They're like, oh my God, you're supposed to do half damage. You cheated, you cheated. And it's, that to me is like what makes Yu-Gi-Oh difficult, right? Is just mentally juggling it all. And to get back to the whole archetype thing, Tyr is like one relevant example, but that really actually applies to any archetype. Let's say you're playing against Melfi for the first time. Let's say you're playing against Madolche for the first time, Witchcrafter for the first time, Labyrinth for the first time, Adamancipator for the first time, Eldritch for the first time. Any of these decks that have very gimmicks that are very unique to them, but that the opponent still needs to like know and read in order to keep up with. We have this sort of running joke with a few friends of mine where it's like, if you're reading, you're losing. And by that, I mean, if you're in a tournament and you're playing against like a deck that you just have not played against, like Magical Musketeers, and like you don't know what their gimmick is and how they work, you're probably just going to lose that game. Like, not necessarily, I'm not saying that as an absolute, but you know what I mean, right? This whole idea that like you need to know what they do and like have synthesized it and know the counterplay to them. And like Magical Musketeers or any of the other examples I gave aren't even necessarily like tournament relevant decks or anything, but if you don't know what's going on and you have to read them in the middle of the game, it's tough. Then time's ticking down if it's like a tournament, so you don't really have time to like read everything carefully, and then you might miss a small amount of tech that causes you to lose the game. Like maybe one of their cards only does this when it's in attack position, but you think it does it when it's in defense position. And so you make a play around that, and then like you realize, oh, I could have done this, and it's like that's kind of where Yu-Gi-Oh oftentimes can be not frustrating, but like can feel very demanding, I think, for someone like me who plays it for videos, but also maybe just for somebody to learn it. I think that they would learn the rules easily. I really do. I just think that being asked to kind of also learn a whole new game, it almost feels like when it comes to different archetypes, you learn a whole new game the first time you play against an archetype and you have to like deal with its gimmick. Learning that on the fly with each game, that's the more demanding part. And so, yeah, it's not that the card text is long. I mean, that's, I guess, part of the problem. It's just that each archetype really does its own thing. And then there's also the layers of stuff that happens turn over turn over turn in Yu-Gi-Oh! To where I have a lot of respect for the people who can do it. I really do. The people who can kind of like stay so focused and keep all these elements in mind. Um, Good for them, especially at these like high pressure tournaments. I think a small related thing that I also kind of read an article about the other day was like note taking in Yu-Gi-Oh! So note taking is actually legal in Yu-Gi-Oh! Under some specific circumstances. There was a really good TCG Player article that sort of outlined like how you can like take notes and how it can be really helpful, and how a lot of people, it's criminally underused. Many players don't take notes in tournaments to like keep track of mandatory game state things or hard once per turn effects. And so it can sort of lead to a lot of mess ups in these like YCS live streams or feature matches where people just forget about stuff. And then, the audience is sort of like, oh my God, how did you miss this? Oh, this person cheated. When in reality, it's just a lot to keep up with. But if they had maybe taken notes, it might have helped these problems not have occurred. And so that's actually something that I'm going to be starting to do more myself when I play Yu-Gi-Oh! I want to get started into like the kind of the more like the taking notes thing, right? Taking more notes and to keep the game state just in mind, that Pot of Prosperity example, like all of it, so that I am able to maybe better keep track of things. There's sort of this, it's sometimes shunned, I feel, in Yu-Gi-Oh! It's like there's this expectation that like you're not good enough if you can't keep up with everything going on. And maybe getting that extra bit of help is something that more players could afford to do. So if you haven't been practicing note taking, learn the ways in which you can legally take notes and maybe start doing that. Might be really helpful too. Okay. I've gone on for long enough. I think this was one of those like stream of consciousness videos. So I'm sorry if it maybe didn't make a whole bunch of sense, but maybe somebody out there can relate to it. What do you guys think? I mean, do you feel that Yu-Gi-Oh is like an easy game to play? Do you ever sometimes feel a little bit overwhelmed and just like make errors and stuff like that? Sometimes even with like cards that were really simple. Like it's just funny, real quick thing I'll add in is like recently I was playing with Cyber Dragons. I was using Power Bond, and I remember using Power Bond, and I just fused. I didn't actually increase my monster's attack, and I didn't take the damage at the end of the turn like what you're supposed to do with Power Bond. So it's like I just doubly sort of cheated or whatever, and it just in my head, I just didn't even process it because the deck that I was playing against was, I don't remember what deck it was. It was something fairly new. It might have been like a Therion thing or whatever. There were a lot of moving parts to what I was playing against, and I was like reading it and like thinking about all of that, and I just played Powerbond and just didn't do anything right. But it's like Powerbond's an old card, and I've known about it for a really long time, but like I still just, I was like, oh my god, am I just getting old? Am I just a boomer? I don't know. Maybe the kids can remember all this stuff, maybe not. And sometimes I see people complain about it, like on, online. They'll send me messages and like, yeah, this is like, it's how do you get good at this? And I'm like, I'm not good at this. So I don't know. Okay, anyways, I've gone on long enough. I'll see you guys in the next one. Let me know what you think down in the comments about this issue. Subscribe to APS Plus. I'm going to try to upload a video on here every day this month. We'll see how long it lasts, but it'd be great if you guys join me for such an endeavor. All right, see you next time. Fast turn.